So here we are beginning the first of 5 talks on the third Noble Truth. In a sense, we're halfway through the 4 Noble Truths, and we're beginning the second half, and we're beginning now with what can be considered the good news of Buddhism. And even though the third Noble Truth involves the cessation of suffering, that cessation is the good news. It's good to know that it's not necessary to suffer all the time. Suffering can come to an end. But also the cessation of suffering allows for new possibilities, new expressions of ourselves in that freedom that comes with the ending, the cessation of certain things. The word Nirodha is what we translate as usually as cessation. I find it very interesting that the word, the root of the word is rodha, which means obstacle, and the ni means something like no obstacle or without obstacle. And whereas in the English word cessation, it kind of just implies the end of something. And therefore some people might even feel like, well, that can't be that inspiring or such good news, just the ending of things is kind of depressing. But the idea of the absence of obstacles, that can seem much more inspiring or meaningful, because then that implies a certain freedom to move ahead, to do what we want to do. And so the combination of this, really the deep ending of something, and then the possibility of freedom is the good news of Buddhism. There's a lot of endings, that cessations which come along with Buddhist practice, and it's useful to recognize them as they come along, because the endings can also give birth to a lot of inspiration, a lot of joy, a lot of encouragement in the practice. And also the cessation ending of things, kind of, when you really see them, we see it, the opening that comes there. Almost like they're the guide or the door that opens to go deeper and deeper into the Dharma. So just to mention some of these endings that really can be dharmic endings. Endings that are the end of being lost can be a relief. Endings that end misunderstandings can be enlightening. Endings that begin the path to freedom can be a refuge. Endings that end suffering are liberating. These are all endings that characterize Dharma practice. Learning to recognize these endings can engender tremendous faith in the practice. So the third Noble Truth, the simplest formulation of it, is the Noble Truth of the cessation of suffering. And as I've been saying these previous weeks, there are a number of different interpretations for what this means. The one that's usually held up as the kind of the primary reference point for this is the Buddha's teachings in what's called his first sermon, the Turning the Wheel of the Dharma discourse. And I want to read you that passage, how it's discussed there. And the reason to read it to you is one of the primary reasons is so you get you can hear how thoroughgoing this cessation is, how thoroughgoing is an ending. It's an absence of something. Now, this, bhikkhus, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-reliance on it. So these very strong words, remainderless fading away, cessation, giving up, relinquishing freedom from it, and non-reliance on it. This is how Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it. And in particular, it's the cessation, the relinquishing, the giving up, the freedom from craving. And this kind of passage is part of the source of this idea that if that's what we're giving up in the third noble truth, then this must be and this is the cessation of suffering. To end suffering is to give up craving. Then craving is the cause of suffering. One of the most common modern interpretations. However, there's a preposition here. It says that same craving. It's here in this text. It's really talking about or concerned with a particular kind of cessation that is a cessation of someone who's fully enlightened, who've already maybe experienced degrees of enlightenment already, and to become fully enlightened when it no longer is reborn. And here they're talking about what it takes to no longer be reborn, and it's the craving for rebirth, for rebecoming. And it's that craving which is totally let go of. So we talked about that a little bit last week, and I'll talk more about this particular idea. It's one particular elaboration, application of something that's much deeper, experience of cessation, that or more thoroughgoing, foundational experience of cessation, which these ancient texts repeat over and over again. But the emphasis now, I want to say how thoroughgoing this ending is, the cessation. And that we find in early Buddhism a lot of emphasis on not attaining something, like something, but rather releasing something, letting go of something. And the freedom of being without, the freedom of not being caught, of being attached, the freedom of not building up and creating a sense of self. And over and over again, the discussion of practice the goal of practice is described mostly in negative terms, mostly in what's absent. And because of that, and part of the delight of this and the benefit of this is that absence is not something we can cling to very well. We can't hold on to it or make a self out of it. There's nothing there. If I open my fist and I love the absence of the fist, but then I want to be attached to it, I'm attached to that open fist, then I close down around it because I want to hold on to it. Or if I'm attached to the openness, I can't really grab onto it because then, So as soon as there's something that we think is the goal, which is a thing, people can so easily get attached to it or live in expectation of it or want it. But it's the absence. Like the metaphor of a path, which we'll look about next week, is the path is a clearing where it's easy to walk, like a clearing in the woods or the jungle. Everything's kind of clear and open so you can pass through. As soon as there's an obstacle or it's overgrown, it's no longer a path. So this idea of what's absent that opens up for us the world, opens up a sense of newness, possibility, freedom, is part of this. The idea that things cease and end, they're in their inconstancy and change, is celebrated in a particular poem in the ancient world, which is called the saying, or the saying of the Arhants, the fully enlightened ones. And it's some of you, I'm sure, know this. It's often chanted in Pali. Anicca vata sankara upadavaya dhammino upakito va niruchanti tesang vupasamo sukho. Impermanent are all mental formations. Their nature is to arise and vanish. Having arisen, they cease. Their stilling is blissful, is happy, sukho. So this insight into the Nirodha, the cessation of suffering, that's is built on a deep insight into inconstancy, the arising and passing, the appearing and disappearing of things. This kind of cessation of it is meant, it brings happiness, the happiness of the arhats, the happiness of practice. And and so this is what we'll be looking at some this week. And this Nirodha, cessation, the freedom from obstacles, and go through it in a number of different ways until Friday. We'll culminate in looking a little bit more at the happiness of the arhats, the happiness at the end of the path of cessation, full cessation. So thank you, and look forward to our time tomorrow.